Gad, a troop shall overcome him, but he shall overcome at the last.
Definition for savage, meaning wild and untamed, was a term to dehumanize it, excused everything from land occupation and native genocide to slavery. It's a term not welcome among indigenous communities. Dred Scott decision, legal case 1857, in which the U.S. Supreme Court decision is that African Americans and Native Indians were not and could never be U.S. citizens and had no rights that a white man needed to respect.
According to JSTOR, George Washington, through the Sullivan-Clinton campaign of 1779, waged a devastating scorched earth campaign that contributed to the deaths of many Haudenosaunee people.
Gad, a troop shall overcome him, but he shall overcome at the last.
We have Hebrew words in our language, celebrations of new moon festivals.
My people have many things in common as far as the traditions and sacred things concerning, for example, there was a celebration of new moon, there was a seventh day of rest, we didn't eat swine, there were cities of refuge, we celebrated 7 sacred feasts during the year, and so there were many commonalities that we found.
Tribe in the Americas called themselves Tsitsa, which means people of the fringes.
Really?
You know, and their cousin tribes, the Shoshone, whose symbol is a rose, we find Shoshana, which is a rose.
Now you.
Like I said, there's so many things in the traditions, the customs, the spirituality that just go beyond coincidence.
For example, my people's traditional name, the Cherokee's traditional name for ourselves is Anikaduaya, which means the principal people of Yah.
And the Cheyenne tribe in the Americas called themselves Tsitsa, which means people of the fringes.
Really?
You know, and their cousin tribes, the Shoshone, whose symbol is a rose, we find Shoshana, which is a rose.
Now you.
Like I said, there's
Gad, a troop shall overcome him, but he shall overcome at the last.
Here. This, by the way, is sitting in Ohio. Well, he opened up the box and he found a little man inside, a little black stone. They took it to scholars and they looked at it. The man seems to be carrying something, and there's writing here at first they couldn't recognize. The writing is, they thought in 1860, some sort of Hebrew. Well, finally, about 20 years later, they found some rabbis living in the area, and the rabbis looked at that, and they could read it. They said it was an old kind of block Hebrew, and it was a rendition of the 10 Commandments. Now, this is another piece. Block Hebrew, they said they'd never seen anything like it. Mainstream archaeologists at the time called this a hoax. But then in 1900, or just about after 1900, in Israel, they found the same block-style Hebrew writing. Mainstream archaeologists still dismissed the findings. They found it in Israel, and they found it in Ohio. But there was another stone that they found that they couldn't argue. This is the Bat Creek stone. It was found during the course of an official Smithsonian evacuation. The Smithsonian didn't understand the meaning of the writing on the stone. They thought it was Cherokee, since it came from Cherokee country. They didn't realize that it's actually Hebrew. They had published this originally upside down. They threw it in a box at the bottom of the Smithsonian, put it in the basement. Many years later, a scholar took it out of the box, looked at it, and went, oh my gosh, it's upside down. It's Phoenician, ancient Hebrew. So what's going on here? What is that about? Where is that history? I'll show you in a few minutes, and we're going to have a conversation, and I'm going to show you some more things that the Smithsonian, science, government, commerce colluded to erase.
Consulted against thy hidden ones,
They have said, "Come and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance."
Website, lostcivilizationdvd.com. Here's the thing we should be asking ourselves. I don't know the story of these. Do you know that? Did you know that? Do you live in Ohio and did you know that? Why not? Were the American Indians wronged? Yes. Yes. And that's what we focus on in America, is we were bad to the American. Forget about it. It's in the past. The question should be the ones that the founders asked. Who are they? What knowledge do they have? Can you imagine the difference we would have now if we would put our differences aside and put our past in the past and concentrate on today and say, let's learn from each other. What do you have? What is that? What is that? When we come back, I'm going to be the history that has been erased in our nation, and in particular with the Native Americans, happened because it didn't fit the story they created, Manifest Destiny. It only works when Indians were savages, and they had to have savages for commerce and government to expand. The ancient artifacts prove otherwise. Why aren't we looking into those? Peter Lilbeck.
You see that? You see, prophecy trumps over DNA, and bloodline trumps over skin complexion, and true history lines up with the Bible. So let the righteous rebel. All praises. So we're going to break down one of the prophets in the Indian tribes. And his name is Looking Horse. And he speaks a prophecy concerning things that will take place pretty soon. And is lining up with the word of the Most High, right? Because they are from the tribe of Gad. So let's break down this video and see what he has to say concerning prophetic times. Let us continue.
The early settlers and explorers believed in a lost race because they didn't believe that the American Indians, as viewed as a savage culture, would be capable of the sustained effort needed to quarry tons of earth. This is a picture of the Miamisburg Mound. It is 68 feet high. It is 852 feet in circumference. It contains over 20,000 wagon loads of dirt. And this wasn't all. There are over 500 mounds and over 100 earthworks enclosures found in Ross County, Ohio alone. The date of the people who built this mound, as shown on this plaque, is from 1000 BC to 400 AD. Of America's heartland are these giant geometric earthworks, in which these mound building cultures constructed huge circles and giant squares, which are very symbolic of heaven and earth. These reoccurring designs gives evidence of a centralized government, as these ceremonial sites would have been designed by some master architect, as they are very similar but are not that close together.
Simon also built a monument upon the tomb of his father and his brethren, and raised it aloof to the site with huge stones behind and before. Moreover, he set up 7 pyramids, one against another, for his father and his mother, and for his 4 brethren. Verse 28. Exodus chapter 1, verse 11. Therefore, they did set over them taskmasters to afflict them with their hard burdens, and they built for Pharaoh treasured cities, Pantheon, and Ramesses.
People are going to be really mad that I pointed this out, but have you ever noticed all the guest speakers on Ancient Aliens are really white? That's weird, right? Because this show is primarily about analyzing the culture of people of color in ancient history, and yet the only times I ever seem to notice a local being interviewed is to just give basic facts about the area. The locals are never the people claiming that it was actually aliens. The show is still on the air, it's got almost 200 episodes, and they're still making more of them, so I'm sure there are exceptions. But anytime I see it on TV, it's always a white dude describing things that non-white people did, saying that it was impossible for how undeveloped they were, and then saying that it had to be aliens.
How could the Easter Islanders have invented their own writing without some other cultural influence? They're doing things that would require precision work. How could they have had these advanced machining tools? The one answer would have to be they'd gotten it from ancient aliens.
The Mayans could not possibly have developed these systems on their own, so it is clear that they were given to them by aliens out there.
Of course, the ongoing narrative of these moments is clearly a somewhat contradictory lack of respect for these civilizations and their people. Their art is interesting enough to analyze, their accomplishments impressive enough to praise, and yet the hosts always come back around to directly or indirectly saying that they were too unsophisticated to have accomplished any of this without outside help, which is an opinion that they never seem to come to about European churches or castles or anything like that.
Architect, as they are very similar but are not that close together.
Who created the settled places, the agriculture, the urban design, the engineering, and the astronomy that preceded us, preceded we European Americans, are not quite us. They are other people, we felt. And in the European American tradition, there's a long, long history of our saying to ourselves, oh no, that's those people. And those people can't be as good as us people. They couldn't built those great big things.
Thankfully, today's scientific community is beginning to take a renewed look at what artifacts and ancient cities yet remain, such as these once city walls, intentionally preserved as mounds in a golf course in Newark, Ohio.
I'm standing here at the parallel walls that connect the gigantic octagon with a large circle. The circle is 1,054 feet in diameter. The octagon encloses 50 acres, which is large enough to encompass 4 Roman Colosseums. This was built by the ancient Hopewell culture that lived in this region between about 100 BC and AD 400.
The level of precision, it is incredible.
The entire Newark earthworks encompasses 4.5 square miles, and it was the largest complex of geometric earthworks ever built in the world. It includes 2 circles, a gigantic octagon, a square. But actually what we call the Hopewell culture, things like it at least, and things related to it, covered much of eastern North America in different parts. As far south as Florida, as far west as Kansas City, as far east as perhaps New York.
They had to be incredibly sophisticated to be able to build these mounds perfectly, in unison to an octagon shape and a circular shape.
It's clear that they rival, by any scale, any other cultural achievement in the world. The Great Pyramids, the Great Wall of China, the Roman Colosseum.
I'm not that surprised by it. There's so many other things that we see when we start learning about and looking into Native culture that I think people on the surface may be surprised because they tend to think of Indian people as anti-intellectual or, non-scientific or somehow, living in the backwoods and not knowledgeable about things like that.
The knowledge embedded in these earthworks and encoded in their structure is anything but primitive. It's remarkable.
You know, it also shows that not just high math, but these sites are lined up primarily with the lunar calendar. They had high math, they understood geometry, and because of the lunar calendar, they also understood the heavens, astronomy.
What I've learned now is just how amazing they were in terms of their knowledge of the solar system and of mathematics.
And the lunar calendar comes from the Mediterranean, and then they had the unit of measurement was 606, which they call the stade. One side of the Great Pyramid from the base to the tip of the apex is 606 feet. If you square inside the octagon, which the surveyors like to call, it's a term they use, squaring the circle, and you divide that up into 4 equal parts inside of cubes, you'll find those cubes are all made of 606-foot lines per cube side. The angle of the Great Pyramid of Egypt runs 51.8 degrees up the slope from the base to the angle. That measurement is there, and when you come off of the baseline at Newark and you run true north and then measure that angle back to the baseline, what do we find? 51.8 degrees. So did they have the same math as the ancient Egyptians? Well, I gotta say, yeah, it sure looks like it.
It's as inspiring, I think, in its way as the NASA program to send a man to the moon.
Most of the Mediterranean societies, civilizations, ran their calendar on the lunar cycle, or a 13-month calendar. And that can be fully demonstrated with the Hopewell people as well. Again, another nice parallel to the Mediterranean contact.
And what a special place it is. You feel that right away. You feel it immediately when you're there. I was in a kind of strange position because I was on a job interview when they took me to the site, and I was literally just from the presence of the place moved to tears and felt kind of uncomfortable as a person in a job interview, but yet having these strong emotional feelings and some connection to this place and the history that was there. And it just occurred to me, how could this be?
These early histories of America's heartland, we found it interesting to see how some of these earliest settlers viewed the origin of the Indians. One group was the early Jesuits, who viewed the Indians in a different light than most, for they were seekers of the lost 10 tribes, believing that the Native Americans might be of Jewish descent who just needed to be familiarized with their heritage. Reverend John Elliott of Roxbury, Massachusetts, in a spirited effort to convert the Algonquin tribe of Indians, made a translation of many parts of the Bible into the Algonquin language. He and Roger Williams were of the branch of Puritans, still cleaving to this view that the Indians were worthy of salvation. William Penn, disposed towards conversion rather than extinction of the Indians, reported that the Indians of Pennsylvania resembled the Jews of London, unquote. One of the earliest writers to explore these ruins and the origin of the Indian was James Adair, who traded and resided among the Indians for some 40 years, where he was encouraged to write a book in 1775 entitled The History of the American Indians. In it, he stated, "As I traded among the Indian Americans, I was forced to believe them descended from the Israelites. This descent I shall endeavor to prove from religious rites, civil and marital customs, funeral ceremonies, manners, language, and traditions." As these early explorers were finding evidence that the early Indian populations were more than just mere savages. Another man who was reaching out to the American Indian found in America's heartland was Joseph Smith. Upon the 1830 publication of the Book of Mormon in Palmyra, New York, Joseph Smith began to reach out to the Indians in a missionary effort. He directed the missionaries to the Cataractus Indians of Buffalo, New York, to the Whatnots of Ohio, to the Delaware Indians of Missouri, along with the Fox and the Sac and the Seneca Indians of that region. Joseph Smith, in the same Wentworth letter, which the LDS Church was given the Articles of Faith, Joseph Smith stated, "I was also informed concerning the aboriginal inhabitants of this country, and shown who they were and from whence they came. The remnant are the Indians that now inhabit this country." There was one mound construction that would lend credence to this idea that some of the Indian tribes may be of Hebrew descent. While visiting Mound City National Park in Ohio, I pulled out this survey map from Squires and Davis's book, The Ancient Monuments of the Mississippi Valley. It was a survey of a giant earthwork, which looks like a Hebrew oil lamp and a menorah. And so I asked the park director where we'd have to go to see this particular earthwork. And he says, well, you'd have to get in your car and go down the highway some distance to Milford, Ohio. And at the crossroads there, that is where it was, but no longer it exists, because the Army Corps of Engineers came in and wiped it clean. And so I stood and I thought, and I said, well, isn't this America's antiquities that we're talking about? I mean, who would come in and make that decision to wipe these earthworks clean? And so I started to ask the question, well, who would be in that kind of position? Well, we read that John Wesley Powell was director over mound building exploration, and that he was a major in the Army Corps of Engineers, because he wanted everybody to call him Major because of that relationship. And we ask ourselves, well, why? Why, and how did this happen? And thus it kind of led us on this adventure of discovery.
For lo, thine enemies make a tumult, and they that hate thee have lifted up the head. They have taken crafty counsel against thy people, and consulted against thy hidden ones. They have said, come, and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance. For they have consulted together with one consent. They are confederate against thee. The tabernacles of Edom and the Ishmaelites, of Moab and the Hagarenes, Gebal and Ammon and Amalek, the Philistines with the inhabitants of Tyre, Asser also is joined with them. They've holpen the children of Lot. Selah. Do unto them as unto the Midianites, as to Sisera, as to Jabin at the brook of Kison, which perished at Endor. They became as dung for the earth. Make their nobles like Oreb and like Zeb, yea, all their princes as Zebah and as Zalmunna, who said, let us take to ourselves the houses of God in possession. O my God, make them like a wheel, as the stubble before the wind. As the fire burneth the wood, and as the flame setteth the mountains on fire, so persecute them with thy tempest, and make them afraid with thy storm. Fill their faces with shame, that they may seek thy name, O Lord. Let them be confounded and troubled forever. Yea, let them be put to shame and perish, that men may know that thou, whose name alone is Jehovah, art the most high over all the earth.